Morning to you. It's 3 minutes after 10 and you have made probably the wisest decision that you will make today by tuning in to James O'Brien on LBC, where we will be looking at allegations already coming into the studio. I pretend I'm a proper journalist for a moment. Allegations already coming into the studio that James O'Brien is a supporter of a totalitarian state. Maybe I am, I just hadn't realised. I'm going to level with you, actually, or possibly even confide in you. I don't get the fear that the government is trying to sort of introduce some sort of North Korean style state, and that they're using the cloak, the cover of coronavirus to bring in all of the incredibly oppressive policies and practices that they have secretly wanted all along, despite, in the cases of Boris Johnson and most obviously, I suppose, Michael Gove, writing newspaper columns for the best part of 3 decades, expressing libertarian outlooks and subscriptions to the polar opposite political ideologies that they're now being accused of secretly trying to smuggle in by people who mostly were voting for them and with them until about 6 months ago. Curiouser and curiouser, said Alice. But, and I've had to do this, I had to hold my nose and go for a bit of a swim in some of the swamps of vaccine denial and coronavirus scepticism and media plandemic, they call it. It's all a plan. So, again, I don't know if you're getting tired of hearing me say this, but again, I'm so conscious. I've been doing a few interviews recently for the new book, and you realise when you explain to people, you realise that you're either 100% across it, you're 100% aware of it, or you will think that I've gone mad. When I describe the number and type of people who would ring this programme if they were given the opportunity to insist that Bill Gates is secretly planning to inject them with tiny little microchips that will allow him to... That's where the theory seems to fall apart a bit, but controllers is the sort of broad brushstroke that we hear most often. And, you know, then you go in on the QAnon stuff, which seems to be in retreat slightly after Donald Trump's humiliations in the American election. But, you know, I suspect it's asleep rather than dead. The idea that the tunnels under London are full of kidnapped children whose blood is being harvested to create elixirs of youth for... I don't know, Tom Hanks and George Clooney, I think, on one of the claims that I stumbled across. So, here's the thing, right? So, because that's so pants-down nonsense, that's so nutty, that's so bonkers, I wonder whether some of us lean a little bit too far away from it. Now, don't laugh at me. I know immediately you're thinking, OK, James, talk me through how you should have a more measured approach to people who think that Bill Gates is trying to secretly inject them with nano chips. I said, well, that's not quite what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there a danger? And this is something that listening to Sheila Fogarty has made me wonder. Because Sheila beautifully illustrates the difference between being, how can I put this, brainwashed and a bit bonkers. Sorry, I know that may sound unfair, but you tell me a better word to describe somebody who believes in QAnon nonsense, or indeed that Bill Gates is trying to take over their bodies. So you've got that bit, the bit that's brainwashed and or a bit bonkers. But then you've got people who express relatively rational reasons for being a little bit sceptical. So the kind of, I probably will take it, but I need convincing that X, Y, Z. And there is a danger. This is what I mean by leaning away too far from some of the madness. And it means perhaps you end up too far away from more rational responses. So while I refuse to speak to anybody who could be described as an anti-vaxxer or a pro-deather, as I prefer to call them, I do think I should learn from Sheila's example yet again and be a little bit more accommodating, a little bit more, what would the word be, sympathetic towards people who are broadly on board or are capable of being brought on board, but just have some questions that need to be answered. Are we making a mistake by lumping them all together? I don't know, probably. So then that leads us to this notion, which has been floated by Nadeem Zahawi, who has been made vaccines minister. And I think it's a good idea to have a vaccines minister. It's unfortunate that the pool from which the current Prime Minister is restricted to pick his key players still seems to be defined more by Brexit and loyalty and sycophancy than by talent, track record, or achievement. But, just because they messed everything up yesterday doesn't mean they'll mess everything up tomorrow. But he has indicated that while compulsory vaccines are not even on the agenda, although I'm sure your Auntie Doris's Facebook page insists that this is all a cunning ruse to soften us up for the moment, just a few seconds away when they will actually make vaccines mandatory. But if you don't have one, if you don't take the injection, there will be some places into which you cannot go. And they will be the places in which you are most likely to contract and therefore infect somebody else with coronavirus. Right? And then I've got this little echo in the back of my brain, which you'll have to be of a certain age to appreciate. So I work with a lad in his early 40s and a young woman in her mid-20s. If I say fluoride in the water, do you know why that's relevant to what we're talking about now? Kind of. And do you have any idea why oh, you do? Okay. So then I've got this little thing in the back of my mind, that fluoride in the water, which was my first introduction to the notion that people believe the government is secretly doing them harm while pretending to be doing them good. Do not at me, call me, text me or tweet me about fluoride in the water, or while we're here, about the flatness of the earth. But that was an infringement of civil liberties in some people's minds, because your freedom to drink water from your tap that didn't have fluoride in it had been taken away by the decision to put fluoride in tap water. Do you see? There's a logic to it, even if it still sounds a little bit silly to some of us. So we're ahead of the curve for once on the vaccines, I mean, there's 3 now in contention. We've got 357 million doses of 7 different vaccines in total. And one of them could be available very, very soon. You have to hope they do a better job of getting the vaccines into the arms of the population than they did on the testing or on the PPE or on pretty much every single element of pandemic management since last February. You have to hope that they improve once again. Just because they muffed everything up yesterday doesn't mean that they have to muff everything up tomorrow. And one of the crucial considerations here is, of course, uptake. The more people that have the jab, the safer the population becomes. There's no such thing as foolproof, I don't believe, in inoculations. You can get rid of infections, you can get rid of disease, but that is a combination of behaviour and vaccination. On this, the objections seem to me at first glance to be a bit shrill. Like they're not insisting that you have an injection. They're just insisting, potentially, and for the record, I'd be interested to see whether this actually comes to pass, because a lot of these sort of backbench Tory MPs who think that their own feelings and instincts are more important than science and expertise, they're not exactly in retreat yet, are they? Even when LBC is carrying adverts saying things like, you're going to have to fill in a customs declaration for the first time in 40 years, people who spent 30 years telling you that we have to leave the EU because there's so much red tape still don't seem to be feeling a scintilla of embarrassment, shame, or indeed apology, but maybe they will one day. So that worldview, well, I'm terribly sorry. I don't care what the experts and the academics and the professors say. I have examined the tea leaves of my wife's Darjeeling, and I'm absolutely adamant that lockdowns are a complete waste of time. Rah, 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 rah. When am I on question time? So that worldview is still out there, still very much in the ascendance, but I still think that Boris Johnson will probably be prevented from doing this by precisely those sort of politicians. Again, maybe they'd be right on this occasion. They'd be the stopped clocks of Parliament. But I just don't feel any reservation at first glance at all about this. And I think the reason why is because when I had it, coronavirus, COVID-19, and I was tested for antibodies and found to be bursting with antibodies, I thought I should have a special pass that let me go to places that reflected the impossibility of me infecting you, or the current impossibility, that like the best available science suggested that I wouldn't be able to infect you or indeed get infected because I couldn't catch it. And while I told you at the time, I was still using the hand sanitizers and the masks because that's almost a billboard upon which you advertise correct conduct. But I should have had a little pass, a little laminated pass. I used to have one for China White in the West End of London. I could go straight to the front of the queue, a little secret black credit card. I used to go straight to the front of the queue. That is a feeling. Now, I'm supposed to be a great believer in equality. But when you scoot past, when you moonwalk past a queue of 300 people and just slide straight to the front of the queue and then get shown to a table that someone else has been removed from, you do begin to get a glimpse of how things like the Russian royal family and and indeed our royal family can cling so furiously to power for so long. But I thought I should have had a little card that simply said, there's no way this fella can give you coronavirus, so he's allowed to stand at the bar, or he's allowed to go and watch the football, or he's allowed to... Do you see? I don't think that was mad. So my question then is not necessarily, what do you reckon, about the possibility of not being allowed into restaurants, bars or cinemas if you can't prove you've had a jab. I'd love you to have a crack also at the question of what's the difference. Because I think those two suggestions reach your ears differently, don't they? Have you had coronavirus? Yes. Can you prove it? Yes. All right. Stick this in your phone. That means you're allowed into restaurants, bars and football stadiums or cinemas, right? Because you can prove you've had it. What's the difference between that and a vaccine? Because I don't think there is a difference, really. But I appreciate that you probably do, in which case... 0345 6060 973. So, I tell you what you should do today. Tell me why I'm being I nearly used a rude word then. Tell me why I'm being a wally. So there's so much we could get through here. I'd love to know what it is that made you think the government are secretly trying to take away your rights. Especially given that most of the people singing from that particular hymn sheet seem to have been pretty full-throated supporters of this government until relatively recently. There's a very distinct crossover, isn't there, between Brexit blindness and coronavirus scepticism. This idea that regardless of what the science says, you jolly well know what you think and you'll be sticking to your guns come what may, thank you very much, when am I on Question Time? So tell me why I'm being an idiot, why I'm being a wally. James, you must open your eyes. If you can't see that they're trying to take away our hard-won freedoms, then frankly you don't deserve to have them in the first place. Just seriously, I don't even particularly want to have an argument. I just want to make a list. Like Santa. 0345 6060 973 on that one. And then the broad question, very simply, I think you're nuts if you think there's anything wrong with having a vaccine and then proving you've had it in order to get into certain places where people will be mingling on a degree, on a level where we now know, something we didn't know in March, for example, indoors much, much more dangerous than outdoors. So we all were very worried when people took to the streets to protest various issues. In fact, we should have been more worried about people playing cribbage in the back room of the Dog and Duck. So what is wrong with this? And I want either relatively simple and straightforward objections or the really big ones that will help me understand why you are certain that this government, populated almost exclusively by people who conflate libertarianism with rules only apply to the little people, they've spent their whole lives trying to reduce the role that government plays in society because that benefits poor people, not rich people. Why have they suddenly changed their views now and they want to actually have a massive government that presides over every aspect of our existence? I just don't buy it. But maybe I'm looking in the wrong places. I just want to know what your objections are to the notion that you can't come into this pub, this restaurant or this cinema and anything else will be between you and your employer or you and your housemates or you and your hall of residence, you and your landlord, I don't know, but that will be the rule. Areas of highest infection rates, which are areas where people gather, that those will be the places into which you cannot go. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What is not to like? William's in Haringey. William, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there.
Hello.
Right. So with regards to your previous point about the difference between having contracted COVID and being allowed to travel and whatnot and get a free pass versus getting a vaccine and then getting an immunity certificate. I think it's important to realize you have to think about the macro scale.
Go on.
On the one hand, if you get the vaccine and you get a certificate, you're pushing all of society to do the right thing, and it leads to the correct outcome, which is herd immunity. Whereas in the other case, if you reward people with a certificate for having contracted
no, this is my bad. It's not either or. I was just explaining my own reasoning, and the reason I've arrived at support for the vaccines is precisely because it's the same principle as a certificate for people who've had it, but times a million. I mean, in terms of what you call the macro implications, it's so much bigger and more important than just a relatively small measure of letting people who can prove they've had it have a little pass that allows them access to areas that people who can't prove they've had it aren't allowed into. I'm not suggesting it's either or. I'm suggesting that my understanding of the vaccine certificate is an evolution of my support for the infection certificate.
Right, but the infection certificate by itself could be dangerous because it could lead to people willingly contracted COVID.
Yes, but no one's suggesting that we have that. No one's suggesting that we have that.
Oh, but earlier you were saying you didn't see the difference between...
Yes, philosophically. In the context of my evolution to support for the vaccine certificate. I'm not endorsing the idea of a certificate for everybody who's had it, largely because we don't need to. Yes, no, I'm happy to clarify.
Long-time fan, but that struck me as a weird argument.
That's why the phone lines are open, William. If you, a clever man like you, misunderstood what I said, then I'm happy to accept that it was 52% my fault, 48% yours. Those are my favourite ratios, as I'm sure you appreciate. 10:24 is the time. Kyle's in Leeds. Carl, what would you like to say?
I just want to say that there's a 99.5% survival rate, James, and I don't understand why making me feel like I have to take this vaccination when I'm going to survive regardless.
Yes, because you might pass it on to people who don't.
But if they've had the vaccination, then, James, then surely they'll be fine.
Well, how do they know, unless everybody has it?
But what's the problem if they've had it?
There's no problem, mate. You're just not allowed in the pub, that's all.
But why not? I don't understand why I'm being ostracised for not wanting something that's still only been tested for 3 months, 4 months.
You're not. You're just not being allowed into places where you might give coronavirus to people.
I'm being ostracised, but if they've had the vaccine, then why am I not allowed in?
Well, because they've had the vaccine and you haven't.
Yeah, but if they're vaccinated, then they don't have to worry then, do they, James?
No, but you're not allowed into the pub because you haven't had the vaccine. Because if they let you in, Kyle, they'll have to let everybody else who hasn't had the vaccine in as well, and you'll all infect each other.
Yeah, but I'm personally...
Okay, let me put it this way. It's to protect people who aren't clever enough to protect themselves. So you'd be in the pub without the vaccine, and under your rules, there'd be some... If you stop talking, I'll explain your misunderstanding, Kyle, and with great... gratitude, actually, for the opportunity to explain this to people like you. If you're allowed into the pub without a vaccine, then so is him, and so is he, and so is he, and so is her, and so is she, and you could all infect each other, you see?
Yeah.
And then you'd all need treatment, and some of you would be intubated, and some of you would go into intensive care, and some of you would die. So it's to protect people who aren't clever enough to understand how they can protect themselves.
That 0.5% of us...
Where are you getting that number from, Kyle?
Not because of 99.5% survival rate.
Yes, but where are you getting that number from?
Where are you getting the death rate from, James?
I haven't mentioned the death rate.
No, but I'm getting the same...
Where from, Kyle?
You're getting from. I'm getting it from when I'm doing my research online.
Yes, but where, mate? Because you can't say I'm getting it from the internet, can you? You can buy moon cheese on the internet. Where exactly are you getting this 99.5% survival rate?
Because it's a fact that it's a 99.5%.
Doesn't become a fact when you keep saying it. Just refer me to the source.
Where's your? What is it that this virus is 90% successful?
I haven't said that. I haven't used any numbers yet on the program. Kyle, I haven't said a number yet on the programme today. So let's just concentrate on where you're getting your facts from.
From the research that I'm doing, James.
Yes, research where? Into what?
I take the phone away from my ear, but to go on to the articles that I've read.
Well, just name... No, you must have gone, oh, crikey, that looks good. That's come from Harvard. Or, blimey, that's from the Office of National Statistics. Or that's from the World Health Organisation.
I'll say it's from the World Health... I can't can't pinpoint right where I've got my
and that is why, Kyle, we need to protect you from yourself, you see, which is what a vaccine would do. So you can stay at home if you want, doing your research, but if you want to move into a public space where you might infect other people, I'm afraid you'll be prevented from doing so. Do you understand why now?
But I can go out and mix with the public and do what I want. And be fine with the 99.5% survival rate.
But you keep saying this number. You keep saying, what if I said now it's got a 100% death rate? And you said, where are you getting that number from? And I said, my research. I'm getting it from my research. No, only the people that have had it.
Though, is it.
Well, that's all a conspiracy, you see, Kyle, because I saw it on Facebook, and there are a lot of people who are actually dead who are still walking around.
Is there?
Yes. I researched it on the internet. They're like zombies, and because they've got these chips in them, Bill Gates is controlling them with a PlayStation 4 controller. Seriously. Just have the vaccine, man. Chris is in Sutton Coldfield. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi there. I just wanted to say that I just think it's really sad that so many people out there have just decided what they're going to believe in.
Oh, don't be rude. They haven't decided. They've done loads and loads of research on the internet.
Well, absolutely.
Yes.
But, it's really sad, and it's not just with coronavirus, it's with everything. It's all these conspiracy theories. It's everything to do with Brexit. It's literally...
Well, I can't separate the two, but I'm a stuck record on Brexit. Is it possible that without the weaponisation of deceit at the very highest level of government, that we'd still have this widespread weird scepticism about something as simple as science?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think more, today more than ever, or these days more than ever, people once they've got their opinion, they are so inflexible and they are not willing to.
Why do they get cross when you ask them where it came from, do you think?
Because they don't have an answer, because they've decided in their heads that that's what they're going to believe in, but that's a lot of it isn't based on any real, empirical evidence or any kind of scientific research or anything that's sane. They've just decided that, the government's out to get them or whatever it is that's out to get them. They've decided on that, and no amount of arguing or reasoning will make them believe anything else.
But the first thing you get if you Google 99.5% survival rate is we've seen a number of Facebook posts from Full Fact claiming that the current survival rate is 98.54 in the UK. It's gone up. These posts have been shared over 14,000 times. This is wrong. The figure seems to come back from a Facebook post that made the same claim about the US survival rate back in April. So I don't get it. I genuinely don't get it. The last fella in Leeds, adamant and borderline angry, but utterly unable to justify any of the things that he said with what you and I would recognise as reputable sources.
Absolutely. The crazy thing that I think is that, I might be wrong here, but I just think that there are people out there who don't seem to value a life.
What do they think the government want to do, Chris? Because, I'd be at the front of the goodness knows there aren't many people who've been more critical of Boris Johnson and Michael Gove's lies and incompetence over the last 4 years. So the idea that I wouldn't be at the front of the queue if they were genuinely trying to pull the wool over the country's eyes again, or if they were up to yet another epic act of wrongness. But it's people who supported the last one who seem mostly now to be persuaded that this pair are up to no good. What's the evidence?
Well, I'm the same with you. I'm not a fan. I've never been a fan of the Tories or Boris. But we are in the situation that we're in, and there's no reason.
Well, that's the question. You've made me late for the news. It's my fault. It's my fault for talking too much, Chris. I'm going to read this text out because I think it's sent in good faith. And when you do a radio phone-in show, historically, and even before Twitter got invented, you get exposed to even more eccentric views than you do in other walks of life. I always remember a lovely woman who rang in many years ago, utterly convinced that she'd discovered a cure for cancer. And she was keeping it in her fridge. And she couldn't take it out of her fridge because she was being watched by the authorities. And clearly she wasn't entirely well. But on the other hand, she was absolutely certain of what she was telling us. And I just sense in recent years that there's been an expansion in that sort of eccentricity, and it's moved into areas where people probably aren't diagnosably poorly. There's just so much fake information that they can use to support their sensations, their feelings, that you could almost describe being wrong as being rational. And I know you'll hate this, but it is like Brexit. You know, everything now is moving towards that contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned model that I told you would be on the horizon, because it's so tempting, and a lot of people are, I'm afraid, failing to resist the urge to indulge in schadenfreude. So whether it is, you know, as our advert on this radio station, the government's advert on this radio station at the moment shows, for the first time in 40 years, you're going to have to fill in customs forms if you're in business. Imagine if you'd voted because you believed the people that told you you'd be getting rid of red tape. Now, you're not quite ready yet to get cross with them, and I appreciate you still get cross with people who point out how silly you've been, so we have to find a new language for that. But if you, for example, live in Spain and you found out in the last 24 hours that you can't, or that you spend 6 months of the year in Spain, or 9 months of the year in Spain, you found out in the last 24 hours that you can't, even the Mail carries a headline, British expats furious about new rules, which I'd slightly rewrite and say British immigrants furious about rules that remain as explained to them. The problem is that a huge percentage of British people who've made lives in the European Union, or who spend a significant amount of time there, voted to remain. It's just vox pops with a few racists on the Costa del Sol that created this idea that loads and loads of so-called expats were voting to stop freedom of movement for other people without realising that it would stop freedom of movement for themselves. It's unhelpful, and I might allow myself a scintilla of schadenfreude in the specific cases that I just referred to. But it is as if the belief trumps the evidence, and you have to double down on the belief, and it is exactly the same. Exactly the same as Brexit. So, anyway, I'll read you the text. Buy and store food, fuel, silver, gold and Bitcoin. Please, please listen to me. Things are going to get a lot worse. What they have planned is devastating. For every human alive, get ready for mass starvation worldwide. And given the ubiquity or the success of the QAnon nonsense, I'm afraid I can't state with confidence that that's not a more widespread position than I would once have believed. So something bonkers comes into my inbox. I presume it's a tiny, tiny proportion of the population that subscribe to these schools of thought, like, you know, the Queen's a lizard. But if we've learned anything during this crisis, during this pandemic, we've learned that this is widespread. I think I haven't actually double checked yet whether it was a national congress or a state congress, but a fully paid up subscriber to QAnon nonsense got elected in the election last month. A fully paid up QAnon sort of subscriber. That's absolutely terrifying. And it makes me wonder how many of those people sending me messages like that are out there. 10:40 is the time already. Daniel's in Norfolk. That's a bit vague. Daniel, what would you like to say?
You all right?
All good.
Good. Do you know what? I've only just started listening to LBC. I'm on the way down to see my mum in Surrey at the moment.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm hearing all the things that you're saying, and I feel I'm in
that's the magic of radio, Daniel.
Yeah, no, but I'm in a very strange position because I've always been a pro-vaxxer. I've always said my children have always been vaxxed. With this particular one, I'm a little bit unsure because I don't feel it's been tested enough. But however, I completely disagree with the last caller. For me, if I choose not to have the vaccine and my family isn't going to have the vaccine, I'm happy not to go out until it's resolved.
There will be places to which you cannot go. I'm with you up to there. On the first bit, mate, who do you trust to tell you that a vaccine is safe in the context of the ones you've already taken?
Well, it sounds like I'm contradicting myself. But
don't spoil my fun, Daniel. I'm supposed to pull your pants down when you contradict yourself, not have you flag it up in advance.
A very strange caller for you, but for me, you know, it's the amount of time they've been tested. You know, a lot of these things, everything else, like, you know, I said.
Yeah, but you and I don't know how much testing is done, and the bodies that we trust in the context of established vaccines will be the same bodies that are looking at the new vaccines, and we have little choice but to either trust them or not trust them. And I don't quite get why you trust them on, your kids MMR, but you wouldn't trust them on the coronavirus vaccine.
I think purely on the time factor.
Okay.
For me, I think that they've had a lot more testing. Vaccines take years to come through before they're given the go-ahead. And on this one, it seems to have been rushed
not always. Vaccines are often emergency responses, aren't they? No, okay.
But for me, where I differ, I think, from the other guy, if they say to me, sorry, Dan, you can't come into pubs, all these different places, then I say, not a problem. I accept that in my mind. I might be wrong. And if I am wrong, I wouldn't want to infect other people. I don't understand people that would then say, I'm not one of the people that think the government is trying to kill me or Bill Gates is trying to control me. It's just I don't feel it's been tested long enough.
Okay, and who could persuade you that it has, do you think? Because I can't. I'm not qualified.
Time would persuade me. I'd like to see, a lot more people. I want to see how it goes.
But don't we need to understand more, Daniel, you and me? Because time is a fairly vague. I mean, it's a fairly vague answer to the question, because what are they going to do with the time? So they could spend 10 years twiddling their thumbs, and then at the end of that, you'd be happy. Or they could spend 10 minutes working like nobody's business, and at the end of that, you wouldn't be happy. Do you see what I mean?
No, I do. I completely get it. And as I said, this is just me personally. I would probably, if I'm being 100% honest, 12 months from now, I'd probably see how it's gone with everybody. And I'd make an assessment kind of then. I know that might be too late for everybody else. But in the meantime,
it's your personal position.
That my decision means I can't go to places, and I wouldn't want to put my personal decisions affecting anybody else.
I don't share your scepticism at this juncture, and I suspect it might, in the great scheme of things, be a little bit dangerous, but I applaud your determination not to potentially endanger anybody else as a result of your scepticism. What I would say, and I don't know if this will change your mind, actually, I'll ask you whether it changes your mind. If you look at things like cholera or typhoid, plague, even rabies, you were seeing some effective vaccines in production by the end of the 19th century, so the sort of 1890s. So if they could do it then your conviction that time is of the essence begins perhaps to crumble slightly. If they could do it when they barely had laboratories in the sense that we would recognise them today, then as an emergency reaction to a global pandemic, they can probably cover all the bases in a shorter amount of time because of the urgency, no?
Yeah, and they probably have. As I said, have always been pro-vax on everything. I mean, my wife has normally sat on the fence with vaccination. She has been convinced with some of the things you see on Facebook. I'm not.
Really?
Every other vaccine, I would always say, no, our children have them. That's 100%.
But you just think this one's coming. Well, then we both need to do a bit more study on the history of vaccines, actually, and to find out whether or not the speed with which this one is being introduced and developed by, bottom line, by the finest scientists in the world, whether it is unprecedented or whether it is uncommon, and whether it does provide cause for concern. As I say, I respect your explanation of your scepticism. I hope you open your mind to the possibility that even that is itself dangerous. But I applaud your determination not to endanger others, but to wait and see. I suspect you'd probably start wobbling a bit if the kids weren't allowed to go to school and things like that. And that's why, well, I'll remind you after this little break why Michael Gove suggesting that there isn't going to be a passport it is probably not worth the paper it's printed on. I don't know what the best way to proceed is when I need to stress my own absence of qualification, but I think it's fair to say that part of the reason why these vaccines have been developed so quickly is because it's more of a tweak for other coronaviruses or SARS or other diseases that have been addressed, and you look at the science through the lens of what has already been established. But, if I tell you that generally the period that is given to work out whether there are any unexpected or unpleasant side effects will be the first 3 million doses or the first 2 months, or one texter has told me that, you could still respond reasonably by saying, hang on a minute, I want to wait a bit longer. I'm going to give it a year, like Daniel, our last caller. The problem with that, as with so much that seems sensible at first glance, is what happens if everybody does that. So Daniel said, to his credit, I felt, I'm not keen on this one. I'm not like an anti-vaxxer historically, but I might wait a bit on this one because I'm worried about the speed. So someone needs to explain to him why he shouldn't be worried. But of course, in the context of a herd or a population, the question I always ask, and you probably won't like this, but for me, this is the definition almost of my ideology, is what would happen if everybody did that? Whereas a lot of people who lean towards a sort of libertarian far-right view of the world, without the racism, I mean far-right in economic terms, they seem to sort of think, well, I can do it precisely because nobody else will. I think humanity is better served by the former worldview. Okay, that makes sense up until the point that I say, what happens if everybody does what you do? You know, it's like speeding. You know, I think it's outrageous that I get fined for driving at 100 miles an hour. There was no one else on the roads. Yeah. What if everybody drove at 100 miles an hour all the time? That's why we've got laws. So I don't know, but I don't have the scientific knowledge to reassure, and the people who do should be doing that. And speaking of which, this is a perfect illustration, this story that's just dropped, of everything at the moment. Because when that app was launched, there was a flaw in it. I don't know if you knew this. If you were told to self-isolate by the app, the contact tracing app, you didn't get the £500 self-isolation support because literally of a flaw in the app. And they have now fixed it. The COVID-19 app is to gain self-isolation payments. So that is good news, but it's undermined by the question of how the hell could they have muffed it up so badly in the first place. So when I keep saying to you, just because they muffed everything up yesterday doesn't mean they'll muff everything up tomorrow, there's a lovely example of it. They appear to have got it right eventually. Better late than never is not a defence, but it is a relief, I would say. Ruth's in the Cotswolds to steer us back to the vaccines. Ruth, what would you like to say?
Good morning. I'm just wanting to sort of point out why I don't want the vaccine put in my arm and why I think it's a little bit unethical then to sort of ban me from different places just because I choose not to have the vaccine. So if you were to go to the AstraZeneca ingredients, ingredients that are in the vaccine, it's all sort of very technical gobbledygook ingredients that probably none of us understand. But if you were to take those little ingredients one by one and Google them and Wikipedia what each little bit was, there's one little ingredient that says MRC5. And when you put that onto Wikipedia, MRC5 is the lung tissue of an aborted fetus. Now, I don't want that injected into my arm on ethical grounds.
It's developed from the lung tissue of an aborted fetus. Yeah, but it's still
developed from
the lung tissue. But you just misled my listeners.
No, it's
because they would have got the impression that they were going to inject an aborted fetus. So it's some cells from a fetus that have been developed in a laboratory to create an ingredient that goes into the vaccine.
Yeah.
So if you feel abortion is wrong, you could have an ethical objection to that, but that's just a belief. And my belief is that you're not allowed into the pub.
Absolutely. But if I don't want
it's fibroblasts, isn't it? So the fibroblasts aren't in the lung tissue of a 14-week-old aborted Caucasian male fetus. The fibroblasts are developed. It's a diploid cell culture line that is developed from the lung tissue.
You wouldn't be able to get it without the aborted fetus.
No.
The aborted 14-week-old fetus.
No, but that's not in the vaccine, is it?
If I choose to be vegetarian...
And also, that's already happened. So even if we banned all abortions tomorrow, we could still have this vaccine, you see. You hadn't thought of that, had you?
I know. No, I had.
So what's your ethical objection then?
Because I don't want anything that's come from an aborted fetus.
It hasn't.
Being injected into me.
It hasn't come from well, okay. All right. Okay, well, let's say I respect your view, and I'll pretend that you're right, but you're not allowed in the pub. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, no, that's fine, but
Good.
I just think...
Or the cinema.
Yeah, that's fine, but I just think that if you said, I'm going to be vegetarian and I don't want to eat meat.
Or why don't you take the other vaccines?
Well, actually, I have taken all my vaccines.
No. I mean the other COVID ones.
Yeah, but apparently, I've only just realised this, that lots of vaccines and lots of things that we take for granted do use aborted fetus cells.
Again, they don't use aborted fetus cells. They use things, for want of a more technical term, that have been developed in laboratories from a starting point that involved cells from humans, from aborted fetuses. I mean, you presumably wouldn't want them to use... Because if you're going to make something that works on humans, I presume that in the development process, you need some human involvement. And I mean, you could use living... We could use prisoners, maybe, or we could use living sources.
But in the development of these vaccines, they will have used... You know, they won't just have used, oh, look, first time lucky, we've just used a few cells.
And this was back in 1966, I think, that this particular MRC5 was developed. So there hasn't been, but you knew this already because you looked it up on Wikipedia, but there hasn't been an aborted fetus involved in the development of any of these components of the vaccine since 1966.
Well, I think if you did your research a little bit differently, you would find that it's...
OK, well, my bad then. Chris is in York. Chris, what would you like to say?
I'm another caller that's in the same boat as the previous ones that wouldn't really want to take the vaccine.
Why not, mate?
Well, it's just going off the wave of the way things have gone.
Go on.
Which is that, if you want to encourage a healthy population, probably the last thing you would do is to say, stay indoors, don't see your family, don't socialise, keep away from people. You'd probably say, get outdoors, get some exercise, see people that make you feel good. Now,
but hang on, mate, we're trying to stop people passing on a virus to each other, so telling people not to mingle.
But why lock up the people that...
Who's locked up, mate? Who's locked up? Chris, who's locked up?
Well, if you're saying that you can't go out...
Who said that? Who said you can't go out?
Well, if it's starting with just pubs, where's it going to end?
With pubs? In fact, I'll be very surprised if it even goes that far. So just to be clear, nobody's locked up and nobody's been told they can't go out, but that's what you're worried about.
I just think it's strange that the people that, have probably got, like you were criticising the guy before for his lack of evidence and statistics, but it's a 99 point...
Nobody said it is. No, it isn't, Chris, and I'll ask you where you got that figure from.
Well, that's online.
Yeah, but where online, Chris?
It's thereabouts, isn't it? It's there about 99%.
No, where did you get that figure from?
It's all over the place.
Yeah, but who provided it? Because I looked it up and it said it appears to have come from a dodgy Facebook post in America in April. I haven't mentioned any figures, Chris. I haven't mentioned any figures.
Well, then...
So where did you get your figure from? What sources are you relying on?
I mean, you can't just keep going down that route. I mean, basically...
So you say something, and you say it's true, and I say, where did you hear that? And you say you can't keep going down that route. Also, I mean, even if you were right, which you're not, what about long COVID? What about people whose entire lives have been turned upside down, despite having survived?
Well, I haven't met any of those people, and I think it's a shame, and I know it's clearly it's a real thing out there.
So you haven't met any of those people, but you believe blindly something that you've seen on the internet without knowing what the source is?
No, I know that, it's convenient that you're kind of encouraging...
Who is it convenient for? Why is it convenient? Because this is fascinating to me. Who is it convenient for?
Well, it's convenient for your viewpoint, isn't it?
Well, my viewpoint that death is bad.
You've already made up your decision. That's what I find frustrating.
What do you mean I've made up my decision?
Well, why are you so convinced that if you don't want to take the vaccine, then you're an idiot?
I wouldn't necessarily call you an idiot until you'd establish the sources for your beliefs, which is why I keep saying, what are they? And you keep saying, stop going down that route all the time. At which point, I think idiot's a little bit strong, but certainly foolish would be my go-to point. But that word convenient fascinates me. What do you think the plan is, Chris? Why do you think people are punting a vaccine that you know is unnecessary and probably or possibly even dodgy?
I'm not sure. I think it's quite suspicious.
Yes, I know, but why do you think that? What do you think the plan is?
it's difficult, isn't it? I feel like there's a lot of
what
freedoms
did you
being
find
taken
on the
away for
internet?
not enough reasons.
What does it say on the internet? What's the plan?
Well, you know,
I really don't know.
You know,
I haven't got a clue, mate. What do you think the plan is? Why would they be doing this to us if it's dodgy? What's the plan? What's the end game?
Well, I don't know. When you listen to people like Elon Musk, that kind of opens your eyes
But
a bit.
I'm listening to you.
Yeah, but I'm listening to the kind of algorithms of what's going on in the world right now. This is all
Okay.
kind of
Can you
ties
point me
into other
towards
things.
the algorithms of what's going on in the world right now?
Well, people like Elon Musk that are kind
Well,
of...
you keep saying people like Elon Musk. He's good with rockets and cars, but I wouldn't
Yeah, but
necessarily
they're
trust
always
him
making the
with my
big
children's
decisions,
health. So,
right?
so what is the plan?
Well, I don't think the plan is to improve our health and well-being.
So what is it then?
I'm not sure. It feels like it's the
Well,
kind of...
let's run through some possibilities. Number one.
Go on.
No, you need to provide these.
Oh, okay. Well, what do you mean? List what?
What's the plan? If it's not to improve public health, which you've concluded it isn't, what is it designed to do?
It's putting a lot of money in a lot of people's pockets, isn't it?
Well, the Oxford AstraZeneca project has actually pledged to prioritise the poorest parts of the world and remove profit from the equation. So it's definitely not that. What else
we've
might
heard all
it
that
be?
before, haven't we?
No, never heard that before, Chris, ever, actually. As far as I'm aware, it might even be unprecedented.
Someone's what? Donating some money, like a charity?
The AstraZeneca project is absolutely committed to
Where
get...
did that come from?
Well, I saw it on the internet. No, I didn't.
You saw it on the internet?
I was taking the mickey out of you then, mate. It's what they've actually said publicly. So I'll leave it with you, and we'll speak again in the future when you've worked out what the plan is that you're absolutely convinced is true, but you can't currently describe. Is that a fair description of your position?
Well, you know, I'm just...
There's definitely a plan, but you've got no idea what it is.
Well, you know...
It's 11:03. It's the why of it, isn't it? It really is. Because I know that not everybody's ready to acknowledge this yet, but it's very like Brexit. For example, I just got a text in saying, how on earth can anybody ring up a national radio station to speak to James O'Brien without having the first idea about where the facts that they're presenting have actually come from? Well, welcome to my world since June 2016. But here's the crucial difference, and this is where I'd like to direct the conversation next, because they're clearly worried. Gove is clearly worried, rightly, that this so-called anti-vaxxer movement is bigger and deeper than they realised, and I am worried too. But of course, Gove is part of the problem, because the nonsense that was spouted... Well, I'll just give you a quick reminder, actually, of the nonsense that was spouted specifically by him. I had this clip prepared for a different reason, but it's going to be quite useful, just to remind you why we could not possibly have worse people in charge of telling us important information than people who've told us lies for the last 5 years.
Whereabouts in France is your apartment?
South of France.
In the south of France.
Quite close.
Yes. No, I've got friends who live in France as well, and one of the things is that many of them are people, or they have homes in France. Many of them are voting in favour of Britain leaving the European Union because they think it's in Britain's interest, and they also know that there are international laws and international rules that mean that if you're legally and ordinarily resident in another country, then even if your home country votes to leave the European Union, all your rights, all your privileges are carried on and are respected. So the one thing I would say to you, and indeed to everyone who enjoys living and who enjoys the prospect of retirement, which I suspect is many years hence, enjoys thinking about retirement, the one thing is that your investment will be safe and your future will be safe, whatever the decision on June the 23rd.
Yeah, and even the Mail yesterday carrying the headline, furious British expats blast EU's new post-Brexit travel rules, which will ban them from spending more than 3 months at a time at their holiday home literally from January. So you've got 30 days. So that couldn't be worse. But ask me why these people sold you Brexit, and I'll tell you. Just name a prominent Brexiter, I'll tell you whether they were deceitful, self-serving, or just plain wrong. Gove, I think, was driven by the trauma of his father's fishing business in Aberdeen going under, in his view, because of the European Union. There was some debate at the time whether his father actually agreed with that position or not, but I don't have a problem with that. I've put a lot of effort recently, is what my entire new book is about, into working out how personal experiences in my own life led me to be wrong about things in public life. It led me to have wrong opinions about everything from obesity to the sacrament of marriage. I trace it right back to childhood. So that's where I think Gove is coming from. Johnson didn't think they'd win. He thought that by supporting Vote Leave and losing, honourably, he'd be best placed to replace David Cameron in a battle with George Osborne, because he'd have the Eurosceptics on side, but because they'd lost, he'd also be able to woo the pro-Europeans or the pro civilization elements of his own party. Farage, just trying to get famous and hoping to make a few quid out of it while talking utter balderdash every single time he opened his mouth. But you knew that already. So you name them. Priti Patel, probably not bright enough to understand what she was talking about. Nadine Dorrit, so you name them and I'll talk you through how they ended up being so wrong, you know. And of course, someone like John Redwood or Daniel Hannan, they honestly believe that the rules are different because we're English. So yes, okay, so every other country in the world might not be able to do X, Y or Z, but we are England and Britannia waives the rules. So that's a genuine mindset. So I can do it. I can't do it here. You tell me that they're trying to pull the wool over our eyes and do bad things to us while pretending they're doing good things. And I say, why? Why are they doing that? And you can't tell me. Not only can you not tell me where you're getting your facts from, apart from my research on the internet, but you can't tell me what the plan is. Oh, they want to control the population. How and why? And of course, it couldn't be worse that the people charged with taking the truth to the population are precisely the same people whose Brexit lies are about to become absolutely crystal clear. It's incredible, isn't it? I nearly did it. It was nearly 10 quid in the coffer then. But this is what I warned about when I told you if we don't hold them to account for these lies, God knows what they'll be in charge of next. And here we are. Or I might let myself have a tenner on this, Keith one. Actually, shall I watch it? Oh. Julie's in Bristol. Julie, what's going on?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I've run to tell you just how much I've been banging my head on my desk this morning.
Welcome to my world.
To this.
It's like Brexit all over again, but actually probably with higher stakes.
Oh, much higher stakes. The reason I've run is I am a scientist. And I'm not a scientist that works on vaccines.
Okay.
But what I do know is that I trust in the scientific process. What people do, scientists, and, can I just disabuse your callers of one of these
Please.
little sort of tropes about...
you're probably wasting your time because they've been on the internet. They've been on the internet and you are just a scientist. Yeah. Carry on.
Just a scientist. But when they talk about money being thrown around, can I just point out that actually scientists in universities don't actually get paid very much in comparison to what industry earn. They do it because they love what they do and they want to help people. But what that involves is, you set up a hypothesis, you form experiments to test that. And in the case of vaccines, yes, you test. And that has happened very, very quickly. And people seem very suspicious of that. I don't know why. Because the reason it's happened quickly is because we're in the middle of a world pandemic. Yes, money's been thrown at it to get as many people involved.
And that's actually part of the answer to the question of how has it happened so quickly. It's because the levels of funding they dwarf the levels of funding that you would ever ordinarily find in these sort of fields.
Yes, exactly. Because we all globally recognise the seriousness of this. We have to act as quickly as possible. And I've heard, the AstraZeneca scientists, the Oxford scientists, they've been working 18-hour days because they too have family, James. They know people who are dying as well. My frustration this morning really knows no bounds. The same old tropes come out.
Why? And you're no clearer than I am on the why of it, are you? Well, what's in it? Who wins? Who benefits? I appreciate some people who we could name can flog books or... I don't know, is anyone selling any vitamin supplements yet? That's usually a big part of the grift for all the people that have led us to this pass. But in terms of what's in it for the people who choose to believe it, do they get a sense of superiority? Do they listen to idiots like us talking smugly about science while they know the secret truth?
They certainly double down, don't they? You cannot convince someone who think they've seen it, they've read it on the internet, so they think they know best. It's like the people who say the conspiracy about that there's a cure for cancer, but the scientists aren't going to tell you. It's
because of all the money,
because of all the money. But like scientists, all their families don't get cancer.
Is that one of the things? Good grief.
Yeah, the people who just do not think of those things.
Do you know, I'd struggle on that. One of my best people ever is dying of cancer at the moment, and if I encountered somebody who said that to my face, I would struggle to retain my characteristic patience and sang-froid, Julie. I really, right now, I really would swing for them, to coin a phrase.
And I also, a few years ago, it was my first encounter with one of these kind of anti-vaxxers people, and it really made me back off. I knew someone who, when the HPLC, I think it is, vaccine came out for girls to take, so someone I know put up, I won't be, giving that to my daughters. And I had to think for a minute, and I thought, this could save your daughter getting cervical cancer. I'm going to make a comment.
Yes.
And, she just utterly doubled down, was almost quite...
And you perhaps become part of the conspiracy. I just had a fascinating tweet. I don't know, you haven't told us what sort of science you do, but Nick is, I think, works in stem cells and gene editing. And he describes himself as a cell culture specialist in pharmaceuticals for the last 18 years. And he said if you were to oppose any medical drug that had human cell culture in its inception, you'd never take any medical drug ever.
Yeah, well, yes, of course.
Oh, well, look at you laughing at me. I didn't know that. I had no idea. So this is referring back to the caller who was worried about a 1966 aborted fetus being used to develop.
But I trust, I don't need to know what's in every vaccine. I don't need to know what's in every medicine, because I trust the process. Because I know the process, I know what it involves, and I know it works.
And that should be enough, but it isn't. And I can probably giggle about the parallels with Brexit, but this is life and death, as Julie reminds us. And Julie is a scientist. Now, I know scientists are not infallible, but they probably know a bit more about science than non-scientists do. It's weird, isn't it? You think it's new because of social media and the internet. I'm doing a thing tonight with the Media Society with that magnificent BBC journalist, Mariana Spring, who's really been leading the field on this this whole world of COVID denial and hoax and anti-vaccine conspiracy theory. She's done some incredible work. I'm really looking forward to it, actually. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll give you a heads up on how you can watch it or tune in. And it's tempting to think it's all down to social media, but you know who I think of at this point? I think of the Naked Emperor. I think that the tale of the Emperor's New Clothes described the mindsets that we are sometimes in danger of thinking of being brand new and box fresh. It's like a sort of madness of crowds type effect. It's a contagion of crackerjack views. And you never know, do you? Did some people in that crowd genuinely think that they saw magnificent clothes? Because you used to think, didn't you, before Brexit, that eventually the whole crowd would admit that the Emperor was naked. But some people will go to their graves screaming that the Emperor was wearing beautiful clothes all along and it was only clever people who could see them. That's the genius of the Emperor's New Clothes. These two tailors arrive in town, don't they, with no one but these two alleged tailors arrive in town and somehow ended up charged with making the Emperor a magnificent new suit of clothes for which they are handsomely rewarded. And they tell the Emperor that they are enchanted tailors and that the robes are so magical that they will only be visible to people possessed of exceptional intelligence. So clever, that. So they make the robes, they take them to the Emperor and they show them to him. And the Emperor can't see anything. But he knows that only people of exceptional... God, it's even cleverer than you realise that, isn't it? Because people of exceptional intelligence, I would argue, are most likely to say, I can't see anything. If you're in... It's about intellectual confidence. I'd never noticed that before. It's actually about intellectual confidence. So, although they used a small boy as a sort of ingenue, as if innocence would be the antidote to cynicism, they could equally have used a scientist or a professor. And then you'd have Michael Gove in the crowd saying, I think this crowd has had enough of experts. all hail the Emperor's magnificent new clothes. So you and I would have thought until relatively recently that there came a moment in that fairy tale when every single person in the crowd turned upon the tailors who hot-footed it out of town toot sweet and agreed that the Emperor had been stark rollick naked all along. But there won't be. If John Redwood was in that crowd, he'd still be tweeting about how beautiful the robes are, wouldn't he? Even while everybody else was balking at the sight of the Emperor's quivering buttocks. That's the bit. That's the bit right there that we miss. Once all of the evidence has been piled up and become incontrovertible. I mean, we've got adverts running on this radio station now saying you will have to fill in customs forms for the first time in 40 years. And how many people have rung me up over the years insisting that we had to leave the European Union in order to get rid of red tape? Now, they might not have been entirely honest. They might have wanted to get rid of brown skin, for example. But they said it was because they wanted to get rid of red tape. And now we're hearing adverts on LBC telling us that you're going to have to fill in customs forms for the first time in 40 years. Well, what happened to that? Still, though, they insist it's what they wanted all along. It's a funny one, isn't it? So, in the context of vaccines, I know why people misled us about Brexit. Who is trying to con us with regard to coronavirus and why? I'll take first-hand answers. But if I have to, I'll take second-hand answers as well. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Rich is in Maidstone. Rich, what would you like to say?
You're going to shout at me, James. You're going to shout at me. We've spoken about this before.
And you still think whatever you thought last time, do you?
Unfortunately, I do.
Okay.
And I just want to go through a couple of the points, just so, obviously, because obviously you're asking the questions, just so it clarifies it for you to give, a little bit of understanding of how we or others that feel similarly to me,
But you know the questions I'm asking. The questions I'm asking today
is why. Why would someone or who?
Well, how, who, and why?
Behind, yeah.
How, who, and why. So take your time.
Well, for me personally, do you mind if I just answer a couple of things that the previous caller said? The scientists.
Yes, I do mind. I want you to address the questions I'm asking. All right.
Okay, cool.
Unless you're a similarly qualified scientist and you want to indulge in a bit of that would be ridiculous. So who, why, and how then, Rich?
Right. So the people behind this, as we've always known,
behind what?
Are the people that you're talking about are the governments, leaders.
So, but sorry, we need to go back further. What are they behind?
Well, if you
just in your own words, this must be easy. You've rung me twice now, so when I say what are you talking about, you must be able to tell me.
It's the background part of it.
I don't need background. Just tell me what the plan is.
Well, basically, the plan is to digitise everything that we have, get rid of the physical side of human interaction.
What does that mean, Rich?
Well, this is why I wanted to give you some background, James. So, as we know, at the end of the day, people have been pushing for a cashless society, out of convenience, That's how it first started with the cashless society. I'm
only on till 1 o'clock. I need to know.
Oh, no, I'm going to bang it out for you in 5 minutes, trust me.
Well,
right?
Maybe have to be quicker than that.
So people wanted a cashless society, then that didn't kind of go down the way people would like it to. The governments, the credit card companies and stuff that pumped millions.
Sorry, who says it hasn't gone well?
Well, because people are fighting back. People like Martin Lewis as well has come out and said, no, we need cash.
Yes, of course we need some cash. And Martin is very, very conscious of people misrepresenting him in the public space. He's had an absolute nightmare on social media. So can you point me to one area where a desire to eradicate cash completely has somehow been frustrated by society and left them, in your words, bankers, governments and others, deeply unhappy? Where on earth are you getting that from?
Right, because it links into something else.
No, I don't want to know what else it links into. I want you to point me towards the place where you can prove that governments, banks and credit card companies are furious that we still use cash, Rich.
Well, why would there be...
No, that's a question. I want an answer, my friend.
Okay. All right. So, unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to give that to you right this second.
And here we are. First question.
Because we're stuck on time, like you said. But I wanted to.
All right, I'll take that back. You can have as long as you want. Just point me towards one place right now where you can prove that banks, governments, and credit card companies are deeply frustrated by their failure to eradicate the use of cash, and then we can move on to how that leads to your conviction that the coronavirus situation is some sort of hoax. So just talk me through the money, Rich.
Right, because like I've said to you, the monetary side of things is about control, James.
No. You need to point me to the proof.
No, but you have to allow me to link it so that your listeners can make an informed decision of what I'm saying as well.
If you can answer my question, you can link whatever you want. So just point me towards one source, one piece of evidence that shows me that banks, governments and credit card companies have been frustrated by their failure to remove cash from society. Just point me towards that, then you can link whatever you want.
I wouldn't call it that, you know, it's a frustration or provable frustration at the end of the day, because I'm not a banker, I'm not at the high level. But you have to ask the question, why would there be such a push? Why would there be such a push, so much money invested into something which they want to fail? They wouldn't. They'd want it to work, obviously. So that's why they're pumping so much money into it. I have no
idea what you're talking about now, which at least makes two of us.
No, but if you allow me to link it,
James, you can't keep saying if you allow me to link it, you see, because you're talking gibberish. Where is your evidence that anybody sought to remove cash from the whole world?
Well, there has been trials done in America, where university campuses have only used chip and pin systems.
Yeah, we do it as well because it's much easier than carrying money around.
There you go. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, you got me there. You got me there, Rich.
No, but James, listen.
Rich, I'm listening.
How is it always sold to someone? It's always out of convenience. It's always easier for you to go to a cashless society because you can have a chip on your card or your phone.
No. It's easier for me to use my card to pay for my coffee in the morning. It doesn't sign me up for a cashless society. So that's why I keep asking you the same question. And if you just listen to it,
I've heard
you can't.
I've heard the question. I just can't.
Right. So then point me towards one place where you derive your conviction that there is a global drive towards a cashless society led by banks and governments. Just point me towards one place, the seed from which the tree of your certainty has sprouted. Just tell me where you got it from.
Many interviews from Mr. Bill Gates.
Oh, mate, that's just nonsense, though.
No, but it's not, because you said that the gentleman before said something.
I've got to go to the news now, Rich. And he's rung in before. And he goes away again, convinced that he's, I don't know, being denied the oxygen of a... So just point me towards the source of your belief. Actually, no, come back, Rich. What words did he say in these many interviews that you've seen and I haven't? Give me the words that he said.
No. Well, he basically said...
Not basically.
Right,
what did he say?
He said that it would be a lot easier for human beings on this planet to follow a straight path to just out of convenience for society and everyone to work as a collective rather than there being...
When did Bill Gates say this? Because he's normally a lot more articulate than that, my friend.
Well, I said basically, you're putting me under pressure, James. So
you're putting yourself under pressure by coming on national radio to make a point that you can't support, you see.
Well, I can, but you're not.
But there's so many. No. I'm not letting you talk gibberish. I'm insisting that you base all of your claims in evidence. So when I go onto the internet during this news bulletin and I look for Bill Gates explaining why he wants to eradicate cash, how hard will it be for me to find that?
Not hard. Not hard.
And then he'll explain why it's all designed to help him control the population of the planet.
Yes.
Right. Mate, I can't help you. Oh, mate. Alan in Stain says, common sense says the banks want to remove cash, complete control over your finances if money is purely digital. Even you can grasp that. Alan, if you go to the Bank of England's own website, I'm told, and I haven't double-checked, but I'm told that you'll find... Oh, dear. I mean... What they're trying to do in some corners is create a sort of cashless... option that doesn't allow your data to be kept and harvested by financial institutions. But I mean, how do you go from a conversation about why don't you believe in vaccines to Bill Gates wants to eradicate cash? And how does old Rich go away from, and he'd been on before, I apologise, I can't remember, But how do you then think, oh, I'll have another go? And if you'll just let me link this and link that and link the other. And then you have a little look online and you can see all of the things that have popped up on the programme today. And I get frustrated, but I don't think any of these callers are bad people. They are not the ones that are... I guess there comes a point, doesn't there, where you wonder where the line is between swallowing and spreading. You know, my line about contempt for the con man, compassion for the conned. At which point does a conned become a con man? I don't think any of our callers today fall into that category. They sound to me like dupes. And I want to help them. I want to show them to the light, because that works so well with Brexit. So how do you end up thinking, I'm going to ring him up and tell him why I don't have faith in vaccines, and I'm going to start by explaining how Bill Gates wants to eradicate money. And then you Google a couple of these key words during the break, or the nice lady earlier talking about fetuses, without knowing that you would struggle. I think you would struggle. And again, I'm not an expert, but if I don't understand something, I will go to the experts and I'll ask them. I won't do my own research on the bloody internet, because I'm not an idiot. Michael Gove's got so much to answer for, hasn't he? The country's had enough of experts. Well, how's that working out for you, Mickey? So I go and I try and find out, and I'm told that human cell culture is going to be present in almost all medicines developed for human use. But still, you get a religious website talking about aborted fetuses, or you get, in this case, a Russian news site talking about Bill Gates wanting to eradicate money. I found one of Rich's sources, and it's Horlicks, absolute Horlicks. That's a figure of speech, because I can't use the word that sounds a bit like Horlicks to describe part of the male anatomy. I'm not in any way casting aspersions on the efficacy or the deliciousness of the well-known malt-based drink. But my goodness me, there are days, aren't there? There are days. Mandy's in Biddulph in Staffordshire. Mandy, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Mandy.
Well, I rang because I think I was incensed and then exasperated and then scared that
yes.
so many of your
I like that.
listeners-
The 3 stages of phoning. Go on.
It's just scary that people, when you ask them where they're getting their facts and figures from, they cite the internet, they cite Google, they cite Wikipedia, which anybody can edit and put misinformation on.
Yeah, but it gets edited. I mean, Wikipedia gets curated a bit, actually, whereas this other stuff, if you're going to a Russian fake news site or some complete Horlicks of a conspiracy site, they make it look like normal news outlets, don't they? So I've got a bit of sympathy for people who think they must therefore be normal news outlets.
But I want people to stop and think, and I think my mum used to say, unfortunately, common sense isn't that common. How do people think they eradicated smallpox? How do people think we got rubella under control so we didn't pass on that dreadful germ to pregnant ladies, and all these other fantastic vaccines
Yes.
that have been developed? And I think if the government need to win hearts and minds, rather than Michael Gove and other politicians spouting nonsense, I think to put somebody up like, I don't know, Patrick Stevens or Chris, somebody who understands the science.
But they've gone for the scientists. These people go for the scientists. I know it's... I mean, I get so worried sometimes, Mandy, because I thought it was so funny 10 years ago when people used to ring me up and talk about the USSR and the Fourth Reich and all that sort of thing. And we shouldn't have giggled as much as we did. We should have addressed the lies that they had swallowed. Not the lies that they tell, but the lies that they had swallowed. And I don't know that it would work, because already I see Chris Whitty getting lampooned by people who think that he knows less about science than their Auntie Doris's Facebook page.
But we have to win their
try,
hearts
don't
and
we?
minds,
Yes,
James,
yes,
because,
yes.
I mean, when my eldest daughter was born, she suffered from febrile fits, and everybody was saying to me, oh, you can't give her the measles jab and you can't do this. And it took my husband and I to sit down with a professor. He explained to us the pros and cons, and overall he said, there is no risk. We believe the vaccine is totally safe. You know, if you want to do research on it, here's the data. And I know most people possibly don't want to do that, James, but people just need to stop and think.
They don't even need to do that. That's why we're here. They can bring their points to this table, and I'll simply ask for the source, and we'll examine where this conclusion began. And if they can't do that, I can't understand, and maybe it's a failing on my part, I cannot understand, and this is the point at which you'd be perfectly entitled to say, I believe you go to church, James. A little bit of the pot calling the kettle black here. But it's not the same, because I don't expect you to behave in a certain way as a result of what may or may not be my beliefs about something completely different. But if you can't explain where this came from, how can you be convinced that where you've ended up is the right place to be?
Exactly, James. And it's a mindset. And I even relate what you were talking about yesterday, the fact that now they want to put a statement on Netflix about The Crown because people aren't bright enough to understand that.
Well, that's not what I think, and it's not what you think, but it's what Oliver Dowden thinks. He thinks that we're not bright enough to realise that a drama about the royal family isn't a documentary, bless him. Oh.
Yeah, but really, I just want people to stand back and think for a minute about, as I say, how we eradicated those other dreadful diseases, James. Common sense, I'm hoping, will prevail.
It's a great point. Smallpox, polio, all of the things that were... And that's why I've got this obsession with Rosetta Stones or with penny drop moments or skeleton keys. If I get the right question, this is probably something I need to grow out of, actually. If I get the right question, then it will all fall apart. And then it does all fall apart, but they go away still convinced that they're right. So the question of why are they doing it? And Rich had a crack at explaining why it's all to eradicate money so that they can then track us because everything will be digitised. And that's why that's why they're doing the... I mean, how does he go away thinking that he's said anything other than nonsense? I don't get it anymore.
No, neither do I, James. I don't know how you keep your patience. And I understand what you're saying. People have to have their own beliefs. But really,
up to the point that they harm others. Your beliefs are fine up until the point that they harm anybody else. Even if you believe the moon is made of cheese. Until you start trying to make me eat it, I'm cool with that. That's fine. Money makes the world go around. Mandy, thank you. You may be over-exaggerating my patience slightly. Or overestimating, I beg your pardon, over-exaggerated is a tautology. It's 11:45 already. We should probably talk about something else after 12 o'clock, but I'm nothing if not, I think you'll agree, tenacious. And I would really like to get to the bottom of this. It is literally as if you are standing in a crowd screaming that the emperor is naked and people are queuing up to tell you that he's actually wearing really beautiful clothes, but you're just not clever enough to see them yet. That's the point about conspiracy theories, isn't it? You sign up to this and you will see those clothes. And all the people that say he's naked, they're either in on the con or they're just not clever enough to see the clothes. That perhaps is where this sort of weird sense of, I'm going to say smugness, actually comes from. This idea. It's amazing how many people we've spoken to on this issue who start laughing at me, which is probably reasonable in most circumstances. You laugh your head off at me to your heart's content. But if I say something like, well, that's not really what the scientists say. I've found it on a weird website. And they go, as if me calling it a weird website and suggesting that if you're poorly, you go to the doctors. If your car breaks down, you go to the mechanic, is somehow evidence of my sheep-like status. Phone lines are absolutely chock-a-block, although I dread to think what with. It is 11:49 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I suppose if I've learned anything, it's about the quantity of the garbage that's out there. There's so much of it, it must be true. I get that. I sympathise with that. It's not true, but the nature of algorithms, oddly, the word misused earlier in this hour, but the nature of algorithms is such that you will find an almost unleavened diet of nonsense if you demonstrate an enthusiasm for watching nonsense. So it is that these things keep popping up. Bill Gates, population control, cashless society. It's insane. It's demonstrably insane. That's why people get so cross when you ask them to explain why they're... Just let me speak. Don't interrupt. If you just let me link to this and link to that. No, just tell me one thing and then let's work out where that came from. It's the same with Brexit. Oh, they vet callers. They only choose the stupid ones. Well, you ring in then. Okay, I'll ring in. I'll show him. Tell me one law you're really looking forward to not having to work. You and your gotcha. Yeah, but where are we now, lads? Look what's happening. We're carrying adverts on LBC. It's probably taken more calls from pro-Brexit people than anywhere else in the kingdom, all of whom were pretty adamant that we had to leave the European Union in order to get rid of the red tape. We're getting loads more red tape. How's that working out for you? Oh, he gets all his actor friends to ring him. People actually said that. And here we are now, looking at absolute madness with regard to... So here it is. I mean, I don't know, we'll come back to this or carry on, but I'm going to speak to Lee and probably Jack, actually. We must catch up with Jack, because he's on a vaccine trial. I'd love to know how some of these contributions have reached his ears, unless, of course, he's already got all his money off Bill Gates in his back pocket down there in Cornwall, and he's in Tier 1. This is very suspicious. We'll catch up with him in a minute. But I suppose what I want to know is if the virus, the vaccine, and indeed the facts are not as they are being presented to us, if there really is something dodgy going on, what is going on, who is doing it, and why? Who, what, why? Ask those 3 questions and it all falls apart, just like it did with Brexit. I'm not going to mention that again because it may not be entirely helpful just yet. Who, what, why? Who is doing this? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? And if you can't answer those questions without sounding like a complete lunatic, the chances are you're wrong. Lee's in Nottingham. Lee, what would you like to say?
Morning. I do love my wife, amazingly. She's an amazing person. But basically, recently, she started to get more and more anti-vax questioning things of that nature. Right. We both agree on a hell of a lot of things. She read your books. She thinks you're amazing. But I said to her, we just had another big bust-up about it.
Is that why you're sounding a bit shaky?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that, Lee. I really am. That's but I fully look. You're among friends, and I understand why you've rung in. All right.
So we had a child recently, and she started to question about vaccines, about what goes into them, and I was like, well, that's a bit strange because we've never had problems asking about this before. Yeah. She has recently joined. I'm not going to mention the company, but one of these multi-level marketing schemes. One of her colleagues in it forwarded a piece of misinformation, which I said to her, that's completely false, and I'll show you why. I have a good friend. His daughter is a lecturer at a university in biology. I said, well, come and speak to them. And nothing. Even when you mentioned earlier on you were going to do that speech or I believe it was the thing that you're doing later on this evening, I said, why don't you listen in?
The Media Society. I need to check that it's open to the public, actually. I should have done that before I started plugging it on there. But she hasn't got time anyway. So Mariana Spring's work at the BBC I'd refer you to, because she's really led the field on this.
Yeah. And this is the thing. I mean, not trying to. I know you said forget Brexit. We both voted Remain. We both saw the tissue of lies and how everything was corrupted. The message was going to people that fell for the sort of things that they said. And we both said, but recently, as I say,
you can't believe she's fallen for this stuff, can you?
Yeah, I'm really.
So your home
really
life is a bit like my work experiences of the last 2 hours, is that you obviously love your wife even more than I love Rich in Maidstone, but that level of frustration at what you're being told and what you're being presented with that doesn't bear the barest scrutiny, you just feel everyone, she especially, should just know better.
And it's trying to get a message across, because I didn't even watch it, I didn't even contemplate it, because I said, where does this come from? Like you say, question the source, where does it come from? Yeah. It came from a friend, and I said, well, they're pushing it, or they're not pushing it. I said, well, they sent it to you, so they've pushed it to you, so why are you believing this? There are so many scientists, intelligent people out there. The people that are sending you these sort of things on Facebook and other social media aren't qualified, aren't
doctors or nurses.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't even have to be research scientists or the head of AstraZeneca, just GPs and nurses.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. Like I say, I've been listening to your show and I contacted. I said, you really should be listening to this, because it's dispelling a lot of the myths. It's showing people, again, quizzical...
who, why, what? Who, why, what?
And if you listen to that, you'll see that a lot of the things, which are very similar, and then she got offended because she thought I was limping her in with all the conspiracy theorists and things like that. I said, no. I said, the things that they are pushing, that there are connections to it. I said, because of, obviously the fetus thing. I said, that's obviously a lie. It's not been used since 1966, as you said. I mean, I've done a lot of research trying to combat it.
I don't know if you can. You can't. And this is, in a sense, it'd probably be on my gravestone, Lee, that you can't reason people out of positions that they haven't been reasoned into, and there's something else going on, and neither of us know what it is, and it's obviously a much bigger problem in your life than it is in mine, but it's something to do with a combination of fear and faith, isn't it, somehow, from what you're saying?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, mate, I really feel for you. I wish there was something more helpful I could say, except that rather than, and I don't know, actually, whether I'm just trying to imagine how this would work out in my own domestic bliss, but rather than offering up refutations and contradictions, just concentrate on questions, and eventually she won't be able to answer them, and maybe that's the point that the light gets let in.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. I mean, everything else is fine. I know. One subject. It's just I just don't understand. It's horrible to see that it's hit so close to home, and then you look at other people and you think, how can they think that? And then somebody and care about suddenly starts saying the same things. You're like, oh no.
It's scant consolation to you, but your call in many ways is the most important I'll take on this subject, because it's clear not just from your words but from the way in which you deliver them that you're in a state close to disbelief. And what I take away from this is, if it can happen to Lee's wife, it can happen to anybody, and that's what you have communicated to us today, and that really helps remove the notion that all of my previous contributors are culpable or they believe bonkers things, but they're not bad people. And if it can happen to your wife, it can happen to anyone. That's the really scary thing, isn't it?
Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate it.
No, well, you take care. I wish I could have been of more use, but, hang in there. And maybe it'll work. The questions, who, why, what, rather than. Because, of course, most of us are not going to spend 4 hours a day looking for the stuff that you would need to refute the conclusions of people who have spent 4 hours a day looking at nonsense. It's so tricky to argue. You get, it's very, again, sorry, but it is a bit like Brexit. You get someone, are you familiar with... And I realised quite early on that if I Googled while they were describing it, and the facts appeared on my screen and they were completely different to what this caller was telling me, all I had to do was read it out. But I still don't think the callers went away persuaded or convinced, and some of the other people listening who were on the same bandwagon or the same bus, they'd be like, oh, well, he's just Googled stuff. I go, well, yes, I've Googled the European Union's own description of the thing my caller is describing. I'm looking at the actual clause in the actual treaty that he's just described completely wrongly. How can that be a weakness? Oh, boy. Quick word with Jack in Padstow, who is in the middle of a vaccine trial. Or is he?
Those sorts of calls really upset me. A partner like that who's just gone down the rabbit hole. But from my perspective, vaccine trial's gone really well. My second head, I was ugly enough, I didn't need the second head, to be perfectly honest, but there we go. And when we were in the trial, they said to us, who would you like? We're going to share this information with the drug manufacturer and the NHS. And I said, yeah. And then as she walked off, I said, and Bill Gates. And she turned around and just started laughing. Yes. And I was just like, and so I said to her, how, where do you think this is coming from? And she said,
go on.
It's like a religious zeal. And I remember a phrase that you use quite a lot, the zeal of the convert. Yeah. And if you see some of these people like David Icke and this Australian guy, Chef Peter Evans, who was a mainstream chef, who's just become like almost messiah-like figure to people for this thing. And it is, I think, it started off after Andrew Wakefield. It started off as, I think you're right, conservative.
But he was a doctor. I mean, so even though what he did is indefensible, a doctor doing it must carry a little bit more weight, no offence to you, Jack, than a chef doing it.
That's true. But
Jack's a chef, listeners.
Yeah, but those people during that era, the MMR era, they were, I think, largely people thinking, I don't need my kid to get it to put them in danger. So therefore, like you said, if everyone did that, it wouldn't work. But this new one, I feel it's more religious. It's more like a faith in, I am finding something. I am done my research. It's like I have found the true God. I found the true calling. I found the truth. And I just think that it is impossible. You
can't cut through that, because it almost then becomes, and we have encountered this in the past. I'm late for the news, Jack. It's the only reason I'm cracking on. People who then go on social media, and this happened with QAnon, I saw it in America, to almost boast to their fellow believers that they'd been ostracised by their communities and family. So it is a cult, but it's a cult built on even less credible grounds than other cults.
The government